Final 7 days of the 2024 election, and we have a massive show for you. Taylor Lorenz joins the program. We have Gabe Fleisher of Wake Up to Politics. We explain the gender gap and what it means for Election Day, and we go over all the latest polls and predictors. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you here in Austin, Texas. It's Devil's Night right before Halloween, and I have just some urgent news for you guys. Urgent news. If you are listening to this podcast and you were a supporter on Patreon, now is the time to move your financial support over to Substack. Just head on over to politics.com. Click on any of the posts. Click on a subscribe button. There's a subscribe button right up in the right-hand corner. If you use the same email that you had on Patreon, then you should be able to be guided right through the process. If you are starting a new account on Substack, thank you. But the reason why I tell you that you need to do it right now, like not soon, right now, is because we've got this deal, this sweetheart deal, to have you guys move your support. And that is 1 year of the bonus content you guys are used to. 1 year of it for $99. That's 150 episodes of PX3 for less than $100. We are going to take this deal away on Halloween. So that means Thursday. Please take advantage of it. We are currently at 70% conversion from Patreon to Substack. So thank you to everybody who has already done it. All right. Huge show. Huge show. Taylor Lorenz is coming up. She is now independent here on Substack. Great conversation. And we talk about the time that she lit me up on Twitter. She didn't know who I was, but we talk about it. It's a great conversation. Gabe Fleisher, Wake Up to Politics. He helps us break down the last parts of this race. And then we have Mark Sutton. He wrote a book called How Democrats Can Win Back Men. We talk about the gender gap. So meaty. Guys, I'm delivering for you. In this last week here. We're going to go over the latest facts and figures that we see at the 3 o'clock hour Tuesday Central Time. This is the latest from Nate Silver. A by and large decent polling day for Kamala Harris. She had a morning consult poll that put her up 3 points nationally. She had a Detroit News poll that put her up 3 points nationally, but Trump had a Emerson poll that put the Detroit News poll put Kamala Harris up 3 points in Michigan. Trump has an Emerson poll that puts him up 1 point in Michigan. That means that the national vote share is officially in danger territory for Kamala Harris. Conventional wisdom is that you, as a Democrat, you want your national polling advantage to be 3% to 5% because you have an advantage in larger, more populous liberal areas. She's way below that. She is polling anywhere between, in averages. Nate Silver has her at 1.2 points. I think she's barely up, if not down, in the Real Clear Politics average right now. But here's the biggest thing. The poll aggregation statewide, because that's how we decide these things. Right now, Nate Silver has the following. Nevada, even. Arizona, Trump up 2 points. Georgia, Trump up 1.4 points. Trump up 1.2 points in North Carolina. So That's the Sun Belt. Let's go to the blue wall. Kamala Harris up 0.4 points in Wisconsin, up 0.6 in Michigan, and Trump up 0.4 in Pennsylvania. Obviously, that is close. Extraordinarily tight. If these were the exact margins that all the swing states were decided, Donald Trump is the next president of the United States, which is why he is up 54%. He has a 54% chance of winning the Electoral College in Nate Silver's model. Take that for what you will. I know our new friend Carl Allen, not a gigantic fan, but here we are. Let's go back into the absolute world of insanity that is early voting. We have followed John Ralston in Nevada with very close interest. He had the following to write. As I talk to you, the Republicans in Nevada have a 38,000 ballot advantage. That is 5.3%. A reminder that historically, Democrats build up a gigantic lead in early voting, specifically mail-in voting. So this is unheard of. We're going to get into exactly how unheard of in a second. The Democrats continue to pin their hope that something's lost in the mail, and they have a lot of Democratic votes that have yet to show up. In a previous post, Ralston said the following: Monday's numbers give another large boost to Republicans, increasing their statewide ballot. This has never happened, not even close, in the Reid machine era. That is Harry Reid, former senator from Nevada. He is dead, and apparently so is his turnout operation. So it got me thinking, because Nevada is a more predictable state, because we have seen a few things. Number one, Nevada just has less people in it, so it's easier to tell how things are going a lot faster than it is otherwise. It also essentially is 2 counties, and really it's 1.5 counties. It's Clark County, which is Las Vegas, and then it's Washoe County, which is Reno, and then a bunch of rurals. Right now, we are seeing a lot of voters that are coming out of the woodwork to vote for Republicans, or at least that's what Republicans believe. Democrats believe that the Republicans are just cannibalizing their early vote, that they listened to Donald Trump, that voting early is not a scam, and so they are doing that. But what it got me thinking is, all right, so let's say that Nevada is going to be red. If this is true, what else is true? Because I am of the belief that it is far more likely that all 7 swing states move in the exact same direction than for us to mix and match and split them so we can make a pretty picture on 270 to win. All right? These things tend to move in one direction in varying degrees. So let's say Nevada is going to go red. Here's the electoral history of Nevada. Biden won it in 2020 by 2.5. Clinton won it in 2016 by 2.5. Obama won it in 2012 by 6.5, and Obama won it in 2008 by 12.5. So what do we see here? Things have gotten closer in Nevada. Now, if we go to the South, Arizona, not far away. Biden won it in 2020 by less than 0.5 point. Trump won it in 2016 by 3.5 points. Romney won it in 2012 by 9 points. McCain won it in 2008 by 8.5. So if we're going to go backwards, Nevada is more liberal than Arizona by the following spreads. In 2008, it was 21 points more liberal. In 2012, it was 15.5 points more liberal. In 2016, it was 6 points more liberal. And then in 2020, it was 2 points more liberal. Not very much. However, it has always been more liberal than Arizona. So it stands to reason, if history is your guide, if Nevada is red, almost assuredly Arizona is red. At least if these trends stay along, which of course then leads us to Georgia. Republicans have become very confident there. And North Carolina, we do have early voting on North Carolina. Currently, Republicans have more returned ballots or early votes than Democrats. 34.1% for Republicans, 33% for Democrats, 32.8% for other. So you would imagine that Democrats believe that independents are going to break for them. We'll see whether or not that is the case. But you don't exactly have a Democratic firewall being built in either Nevada or North Carolina. Georgia does not slot that by, that they do not slot early votes by party, but Republicans are confident. They are confident in Georgia. So let's assume that the Sun Belt is red. Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia. That leaves the most likely path to victory for Kamala Harris to be the blue wall states. She has to win all of them. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and then she has to get that little Omaha district in Nevada, which means it all comes down to Pennsylvania. Tonight, as I speak to you on Tuesday night, Donald Trump will be in Allentown, where they're shutting all the factories down. Shout out to Billy Joel. Right now, the early vote in Pennsylvania is as follows. 468,067 votes returned or cast by Republicans. 849,849 votes returned or cast by Democrats. 155,909 for other. So, the general thought in Pennsylvania is that Democrats need a 500,000 vote firewall going into Election Day to maintain a winning margin over Republicans. That's the general thought. Is it real? We don't know, but that's the general wisdom. Right now, they are running below that. 381,782. Today, as I record this, the 29th is the last day that you can apply for a mail-in ballot in Pennsylvania, but you can vote by mail all the way up until 8 p.m. on Election Day, which personally I think is stupid because it means that mail ballots are very, very late. You should have to return in mail ballots early. That's just my opinion. Sue me. I think that it causes problems. There we go. So what does it all mean? Who knows? We have no idea what these aggregates mean. We have no idea what these early voting patterns mean. It obviously does not appear as if 2020 levels of enthusiasm are there for the Democratic early vote. But at the same time, who would expect it? That was COVID. It was the only thing that anybody had to do. And if it's too far below that enthusiasm level, then you have a problem. I believe that Democratic enthusiasm is the issue, the number one issue. Because you know that Republicans are ginned up. And the question is exactly how many of those behind a rock don't vote for anybody else but Trump people are going to come out of the woodwork. How many of those shifting coalitions are going to matter? Republicans are going to get hammered by women. It's a Dobbs election and there's a female on the ballot. Will that be X'd out by attrition from the Democratic base? Will Kamala Harris lose leftists because she has tacked too far into the center? Has she already lost a lot of male constituencies, including black men and Latino men? What I tend to think is that these are the kinds of things that will matter more than ephemera like Tony Hinchcliffe. I don't know exactly how much Tony Hinchcliffe matters. Heads up. Okay, here we go. Our first guest, the grand PX3 debut of Taylor Lorenz. Joining me now is the host of the podcast Power User and the writer of User Mag on Substack, the one and only Taylor Lorenz. How you doing, Taylor?
Thanks for having me.
I really want to, number one, congratulate you for coming into our world of feral internet content creators. You are out of mainstream media, and I have a million questions to ask of you with that transition, because as I often say on this show, you can find any two journalists of any beat, and if you get them together for long enough, they will eventually find the real story, which is journalism. And so this is a great cross section. Number one, how have you found your first few weeks of Substackery to be?
It's been great so far. I've had a Substack for a while. I relaunched it in June when I decided to go independent because my editor left. It was July. But I sort of like soft launched it and then officially launched in October. And it's been great. It's usermag.co. It's a tech and online culture newsletter. And so far it's been going pretty well.
I will have to say your big announcement was something that made me feel a lot better, because it was at the time that I was thinking about moving from Patreon to Substack, and I'd been talking to Substack about stuff, and you know, it's a little rare in this world to sacrifice a, you know, safe income of on one platform and move it to another one. And then I saw your big announcement, and I'm like, all right, this validates kind of a lot of what I assumed, that Substack is just, it is hitting sort of critical mass of, you know, both the root level content creation and then bigger names that are coming from mainstream media into it.
Yeah, I think for writers especially, it's a really great place. I think Patreon does have a very strong like podcast community, video creator community. I think Substack is stronger on like you said, like the journalism adjacent world.
You were involved in a lot of online, but you're often involved in a lot of online discussion. But this was journalistically centered, which really was interesting to me. You were quoted in Business Insider talking about brands in media. I'm gonna give you, well, here I have somewhere where I want to go with this. When you think about the future of media, it's much more distributed and about personalities. Younger people recognize the power of having your own brand and audience, and the longer you stay at a job that restricts you from outside opportunities, the less relevant your brand becomes. And I very much agreed with that. I do think that there is something to the benefit of legacy media to creating a stable of brands with the people that are on their platform. And I think that that's something that's happened for a very long time. For whatever reason, this caused a lot of controversy at the time that you said it. But now...
I got canceled for it. It's so funny because I feel like I've been totally vindicated.
Yeah, well, and I think partly is just time. That being said, you are now in a fully independent world. I will ask you, what is the Taylor Lorenz brand?
Oh my God. Somebody was telling me recently I need to like make a brand identity for myself because I'm so chaotic and on like so many platforms. I'm a technology and online culture journalist and commentator and content creator. I started independent. I worked in social media for the majority of my career. So the majority of my career, I've not even been a full-time writer. So it's weird that even people know me as that now. But I would say my brand is just, I don't know, being like a person that talks a lot about the internet and our relationship to it. I don't have a clear brand identity, binder or anything like that yet. But I do cover tech from the user side. And that's why my podcast is called Power User and my newsletter is called User Mag, because I think the most important way that we can cover tech and look at it is sort of how it's being used, less like focus on sort of like the funding rounds and the corporate drama within these places. Obviously, we should keep doing that reporting, but like how these platforms are being used is much more interesting.
I think it made tech journalism so boring. over the
Yeah.
last 10 years to only focus on two things. Tech reporting essentially became gadget reviews and VC funding, press releases or drama. One of the two, right? And so it just made it very, very boring. And I do think that partly we're in a situation now where at least we're in kind of a technological revolution again, much like we were with the internet, much like we were with smartphones, that there is at least a lot to talk about from people who actually care about where technology is going now with AI.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think there's just interesting things happening in the tech space, and our relationship to technology is changing. I know everyone is obsessed with AI. I've gotten recently very obsessed with robotics, and I'm planning a whole series about our changing relationships to like robots in the world. Like I'm writing my first big pieces on the delivery robots and why people feel sort of like protective of them. And it was just very funny, at least in LA, like people here, I mean, everywhere I talk to some product people, companies about sort of why they're designed that way. But I just think we're having more direct interaction with technology. I think at this point, I don't have to explain to people like I used to that the online world is sort of our default reality. I think most people innately understand that. And I think the pandemic, you know, when it hit in 2020 and sort of shoved everyone online in a way that we weren't previously, I think it accelerated a lot of these changes that were sort of inevitable already.
Yeah, it feels like the at least the line of people understanding what technology was sort of jumped ahead like 5 years.
Yeah.
It was in 1 year. All of a sudden, people who would normally take 5 years to understand what Zoom was or be frustrated about it, they got over it real fast if it was the only way that they could see their grandkids.
Exactly. I mean, I think I've been remote. I've actually been remote for, I think, most of my career, if not half of my career. At the time when COVID hit, I was at the New York Times. And it's really funny because the whole reason I left the Atlantic to go to the New York Times was because I was like, you know, I've never been in person in like a newsroom. So maybe I should do that. And I was there for like a year. And then, now I'll never go into an office again.
Well, now, yeah, because now you can do whatever you want. Could you ever see yourself going back into mainstream media?
I never wanted to be in mainstream media, like ever. I mean, that was like never my career goal. When I blew up online through blogging, you couldn't really monetize the same way. Like the best you could do if you were successful, which by the way, all the other bloggers like Ezra Klein, Matt Yglesias, like, although Matt's now on Substack, but like, you know, like you just used it to launch a career in traditional media. And by the way, when I started, they were so condescending. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a journalist for years because people still, even now, like I feel weird about it because I sort of core identify as a blogger, which is, there was all these like, do you remember all those articles? Like, are bloggers real journalists? And now they're like, are content creators real journalists?
Look, I was a reporter. I cashed a paycheck doing the kind of shoe leather reporting stuff for a while. And now I do stuff on the internet where I just sort of talk about whatever I want. And so I always flinch whenever people call me a journalist because like I think of a journalist as being a reporter. And there's nothing, I don't know, I'm now, you know, fully enmeshed in the internet. It's been a very, very long time since I, you know, cashed a check. You know, the last check I got was from Tribune, so pre-Trunk. Like this was a very, very long time ago. But there's, I don't know. I think that there's an interesting evolution of where stuff is right now.
Yeah, I think we're still in the midst, but I think at least people mostly understand that journalism is something anybody can do. At least that's my belief. So, yeah.
I would be remiss if I did not at least ask you. There is your former employer, the Washington Post, has been in the conversation over the last 72 hours. They spiked a endorsement of Kamala Harris. The question of where their owner, Jeff Bezos's thumb on the scale was with that still is discussed. And then today, the reporting is that Bezos has given a mandate to the paper to hire more conservative writers. I'm sure you are still on group chats and have friends of yours that are involved in all of that. How have you experienced it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the decision that I made to go independent was driven by this shift at the Washington Post. My editor leaving, you know, the week that my editor retired, They fired our first ever female CEO, replaced all of the top leadership. Like, it's a very different place than when I originally joined. And, part of why I wanted to be independent is because I wanted to be able to speak my mind. And I'm not conservative. I think Trump is a threat to democracy. I want to be able to openly say that. And I think at a lot of these mainstream publications, they're increasingly under the thumb of their billionaire owners. And that's why I'm against that entire structure of media. I don't want an entire media ecosystem where journalists are beholden to their billionaire owners. And that's happened at multiple places that I've worked at where, there are sort of things that you can express and things that you're not allowed to express. And I think that's a problem with legacy media. So, yeah, I'm just glad to not have to honestly worry about it.
So you are not dealing with it at all. It is something that you are very happy to have put.
Yeah, media reporters like calling me for comment and me being like, I don't work there. This is literally why I'm in independent media.
Like, you are very happy that it is in your rearview mirror, no matter what explosions are happening there.
I think it's going to continue. Like, the legacy media ecosystem is going to continue to denigrate. Like, that's the reason why I wanted to leave. It's like, I mean, I was staying there to work with this incredible auditor, Mark Seibel, but like, when he left, it's like you just look around. And I talked over the summer when I, made the decision to kind of leave. Like, I talked to dozens of people, and I spoke to a lot of older journalists, including ones that like won Pulitzers.
Yeah.
And all of them were like, we're just waiting to get laid off, basically. Like, the future is hold on to a job as long as you can. Hope you don't get laid off. I'm relatively young. I don't want to do that. What if I stay at these places and then what? When I'm 45, when I'm 55, then I get laid off? I don't want
You hope and pray for the buyout? Yeah.
No, I want to be building something. I want to invest in my career. I still have enough years that I'm like, I shouldn't like tie myself to the Titanic,
Well, I think part of it is also just economic. The reality of newspapers and mainstream media in general, both television and newspaper, is advertising. And advertising has radically changed on the internet. And, aside from a boom during the pandemic, which turned out to be a sugar high, it's collapsed. And so the only difference between some of these mainstream media outlets that have totally fallen apart and places like the Wall Street Journal and New York Times and Washington Post to a certain extent is a paywall, which is something that you can do by yourself. Everybody can do by themselves. You can create the content and then ask people to pay for it. And it turns out that there's a lot of people that will do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you just develop a different relationship with your readers when you write for them directly. And I'm not like completely opposed. I mean, I just wrote 2 print pieces for the Hollywood Reporter. Like, I think there are magazines. I like writing for them as long as they're around. But I think ultimately I want to speak directly to my audience. That's why I became a blogger. This is like what the original goal was. It's just that like the monetization infrastructure wasn't there for when I was younger, so now it is, and I don't have to sort of work for these ancient places.
That was, I wanted to go back to something that I kind of lost the plot on as I was trying to remember what Tribune rebranded themselves to, and that was that blogging era of the 2000s, for which right now Substack very much reminds me of. It very much feels like there is this low barrier to entry, and there's a lot of benefit to collaboration, and it's just, I don't know, it feels fun. The reality then was, start a good blog, either transition that into getting a job at a mainstream publication, or if your blog is really awesome, you find some venture capitalist to back it, and now you are going to be the new thing when mainstream media recedes. And that didn't quite work out.
That was never going to work out. And I wrote about this so much in my book. But that whole vision of what digital media would look like in the what VCs thought it would look like. Surprise, surprise, VCs were wrong again. The real digital media revolution, as I wrote in my book, was always the content creator industry. That was the real distribution of media. That's how everything sort of evolved. Everything did end up becoming more digital and more distributed. It's just that wasn't through websites that ended up like looking like the mainstream media. You know what I mean? It wasn't like BuzzFeed or Recode or these things that people thought it would be. But yeah, I do wish that I raised like $100 million for my blog. I could have been rich. I don't own a house.
Yeah, there was a moment that I remember, I forget where I was living at the time, but it was very much, I was blogging and it's during the Gawker boom and everything. And it was the moment that Gawker started talking about pivoting to Kinja, that their comment section was going to be the way that they made money. And I'm like, this is very bad. This is a dark, chilling moment when they're like, no, our real moneymaker is going to be the way that we process comments.
It was sad to like watch all of these companies struggle and try to monetize. Ultimately, it's venture capital's obsession with scale that drove them into the ground. I mean, I got my start writing for a website called Mike.com, which is now doesn't exist. It's basically just like the branding was bought and sold off. But, that was this place, like digital media was where you could challenge mainstream media and experiment and be like edgy and say what you really meant. And, I called Obama, like I said a lot of crazy stuff about our presidents and leaders, and like you were allowed to say that. Unfortunately, when the bottom fell out of that whole ecosystem in the second half of the 2010s, a bunch of people like me, it was like, okay, which path are you going to do? And I remember actually before taking the job, when the Times was recruiting me so aggressively, because I had a podcast and I was like, I kind of want to do my podcast. Like, I kind of want to do this. And everyone was like, no, you're not going to be able to make any money. You have to go work at these places. That's the option for you. And I looked at people like Ezra Klein, and at that time, none of them had abandoned ship yet. So I was like, I guess that's what I'll do. And I don't regret doing it, but I don't know if I regret doing it. It was fine. I met a lot of amazing people, but I do think, that's a path that's sort of increasingly declining.
It's funny because I've had these moments since I, started putting all my effort into podcasting and stuff. And, sometimes it's a little lonely, you're out there trying to convert anybody. And you have these moments where you think of like, I know people at, the Post and the Times and the Journal. And it's like, should I polish up the old resume and, see what I have? And it never really lasted more than a few minutes to be like, no, the second I'd have to do something I didn't want to do, I would be mad that I wasn't doing exactly what I wanted for, about the same money and 99% less prestige. Like, would that resume line be worth it? It was always, it never really was enough for me to actually gussy up the old resume.
Yeah. I mean, this is why also, like, when I left when the Post was recruiting me from the Times, and I was like, God, not another like legacy media place. But they said I could join as a columnist. And if you join as a columnist, you can say opinions. You're not subject to like social media guidelines. Like, you can kind of do whatever you want in terms of outside projects. So I did that. But even then, it's like, it just still, like, especially with, like, just things change and you're just like, life is short, Do you really want to just do things for prestige? I don't believe in that. That doesn't make
well, I do think that you're in a very good position because, especially coming to Substack, there is a benefit from being able to trade on being in a lot of people's lives and having your name out there. And certainly those platforms have helped you. To be totally honest, I do think that, like you mentioned with brands, it would be far more beneficial for a lot of these places to be building up stars, because in the 80s and 90s, when newspapers were at their ascendancy, what did you think of? You thought of the star reporters. You thought of
the star reporters
the columnists.
Couldn't leave, but they couldn't leave and take that with them, and that's what they don't like now.
Yes. Oh yeah, that they can. That it's portable now. They can go from one place to another.
That's why they don't want to do that anymore, because now if you build up someone really big, right? Like, that person has the brand, and then they can take that. They take all their social audience with them. Like, they take everything with them. So I think it's changed the dynamic. And now you see these newspapers, basically they don't want to build. So they want the opposite. They want sort of everyone to kind of disappear into the organization, because that gives them power over their staff.
Which is just, it's just creating your own sarcophagus, because you're just going to continue to box people in, as opposed to saying, we're going to put a lot of time and effort. And then all of a sudden we're going to find an underutilized talent like Taylor Lorenz. We're going to build her up, and then eventually she might leave, or maybe she stays because everything's great. But if she leaves, guess what? We find another person And we make another star. You're the star factory. You're the place that can say, no, now you pay attention to this person because they have the gigantic masthead behind them. It's baffling to me.
Well, you have to remember these are like old, pretty out of touch, multi-millionaire media executives that like don't.
You want to know
it's
I had a friend of mine that got a job as a columnist at the Times, and she went to go talk to them for the first time, and she just described the experience as walking into a Woody Allen movie from the 70s. It was just everything. It was immediately Hannah and her sisters. Nothing had changed. It was all the same furnitures, all the same people, all the same haircuts, and it's like, oh, okay. This is what this experience is going to be. It is very ossified in a bygone era.
It is, and it makes me sad, but not that sad because they're doing it to themselves.
One of the things that was very exciting, as you pointed out with blogging, was the ability to say whatever you want. And obviously that had kind of been usurped at a certain point by social media, which delivered that excitement, that raw, oh my God, I can't believe this is on here experience at a faster pace. Where do you think we are right now with social media?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the 2010s were defined by these big broadcast-based social platforms that allowed pretty much everything you posted was public, default public and default permanent. And you could sort of like, there was this novelty to like, I can tweet something, right? And I can reach the whole world. And we saw initially the media and establishment boosting things like the Arab Spring and, oh, these platforms are going to bring democracy. And then the hammer came down very quick, where you saw the government cracking down aggressively. You saw the media sort of change their minds about social media and think, actually, this is sort of disrupting our business model. We don't like it anymore. Also, the tech companies rightly deserved scrutiny for all the horrible shit they were doing. So now I think we're in this era of social where there's a lot more sort of secondary platforms because we have such a duopoly with Meta and Google. No other platform aside from TikTok, which is also owned by a multi-billion-dollar tech company, like can really get traction against them. So you have this sort of like myriad little smaller apps, I guess, that people are expressing themselves on. People also want more privacy. So that's why you see people also moving to things like group chats and Discords and things like that.
Yeah, it feels like the internet is finally getting the treatment that the internet gave the rest of culture, which is this like balkanization where everything sort of moves further and further away from each other. And now that is happening to social media. And I think it's healthy because I don't think that the place that we were at before, where you had such an outsized reaction to something that goes viral, like the Twitter character of the day 5 years ago was a crazy place to be. And I would assume because you were the Twitter character of the day a few times.
Character of the day many times. I've been the Threads character of the day. Like, yeah, it's not a healthy, I mean, people are the TikTok character. It's not a healthy way to engage. It's a mob behavior, and there's so much context collapse. And I think this, like, the benefit of this new era that we're entering into is sort of less of that context collapse, more community.
It's lower stakes. It now feels more like a world where there's just a billion different message boards, and some of them are very big and some of them are very small, but at least it's not like this immediate cross posting with all message boards where all message boards know what the most popular thing has said. That's sort of become diffuse. Yeah,
which I think is a good thing ultimately.
I think it is too. And part of it is because I feel like sometimes people get off on the wrong foot on social media. Like, for example, several years ago, there was a moment when during the initial interview of Chaya Raichek on Tucker Carlson, I made a joke when Taylor Lorenz's face was featured next to her that they might be the same person.
I got so mad about all that.
Well, yes, you did, because you lit me up on Twitter and you blocked me.
I was like going off. I was so mad because like men don't have to deal with that ever. And
and this gets to, I think, the very interesting part about social media in general, because there's what I have, which is like this very to me funny idea of is this a Peter Parker taking pictures of Spider-Man joke kind of situation?
Yeah.
And then there is how you experience it which I imagine it was a very stressful day in general. There was a reason why I didn't tag you in it. Somebody snitch tagged, and then everything kind of explodes beyond that. But yeah, two totally different experiences that happened.
But it's like I think it's like the context, and also I mean that day was so crazy because also like I think that was the same day like my family got swatted, and my parent it was so crazy, and I was dealing with so much like crazy. And also most of the hate and harassment that I get is related to my looks. Like if you go to my YouTube comments, like all of the hate is just like how I look or how my hair is or what I look like, or there's all these age conspiracies where people all like they're constantly saying that I'm older than I am.
That is the thing. Yeah, that you are whatever age.
I'm secretly like 47 years old or something. I'm like, guys, my work history publicly begins in 2009. I've been a very public like whatever. But like you can see when I went to school, like people I went to high school with are on Twitter. Like what was I doing for a decade in the 90s? But you know, like especially with that, like it just frustrated me because again, like I have friends that cover all of these right-wing extremists. They're all white guys with the same haircut. Their looks are never what people are discussing. No one's like, oh wow, Jared Holt, you really look like Richard Spencer, right? You know, but like with me, it's just like women against women, cat fight. Wow, they look the same. They both have brown hair. It's like, yeah, we both have brown hair, I guess. Like, I get it. But like, again, men are not subject to those comments and scrutiny. And I'm not saying like you're misogynistic. I just think like people like to like, because you're not, but like that comment was just a funny comment. And like, I get it because we are, I think, similar aged women with like similar features, but
yeah. I mean,
but like but that's not the comment that people make about men, and that's what pisses me off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would, you know, again, it's impossible to prove a negative, and I don't think it's probably helpful for the larger conversation about how women are treated in media to you know, take the other side of it, but the relationship between you and Libs of TikTok was something that was very definitional, I think, for a lot of people understanding who you were as a reporter and who she was as a social media figure. There is this, you know, a duality to you guys as singular media entities that has, you know, been a part of really but politics and social discourse.
But part of that is because I'm a woman. Like it's this obsession with like, ooh, two women, whatever, because there are correlations, right? There are these men that have done contentious interviews. There are men that have been in similar situations, that have done similar stories, that are big names, and they're not positioned in the same way. Even the men that like and it just like, I guess that's what sort of bothers me. And also I think it's this assumption when I see people make, because I didn't realize who you are, like initially, like, you know, on Twitter, like, and then people will tell me later after the fact, like, oh no, that person's cool, like, don't go off on them or whatever. And I'm like, oh, whoops. But like, you know, I assume most people making mean comments about me are basically just like Tucker Carlson fans. So,
sure.
Like, I'm reading it through that lens. You know?
Trust me. I am of the internet. There is no personal element that I take to it.
That's how crazy I've gotten.
Yeah. No. I mean, the biggest thing that I learned very quickly on the internet was that you don't know where somebody is. I like to think of it as like a paragraph, right? Yeah. If somebody says something crazy, you don't know where they are in their sentence, the sentence in their head, the paragraph in their head. Like, you don't know where you fit into their story. And so if there is crazy behavior on the internet, then it tends to get highlighted and become singular there. So trust me, I the second that I saw somebody snitch tag you, I was just like, oh God, I hope that this isn't a thing.
But there were it
turned into a thing. Yeah.
Did you see someone made a whole Instagram account about it?
No.
That like your comment was not the only thing. Like this is this like ongoing thing where, again, because I'm a woman, I think that there's this obsession with like with me and also with her, and sort of like, she's the good version, she's the bad version, or whatever. And it's like, yes, we are diametrically opposed on, I think, every single view. And we are both white millennial women with brown hair. But
yes,
like, I think people have these sort of like projections and sort of want to project a lot onto both of us too. Although I think Haya says enough of reprehensible shit. But like I mean, people just make weird accounts. And again, most of the people doing this type of stuff are these right-wing they're fans of the right-wing media ecosystem. Ultimately, there's entire like meme generators and websites where you can make content about me online that exists to feed this ecosystem. So when I see a post, so on a good day, I'll check and be like, does this person seem cool? Do I have mutuals with them? But on a bad day, which that was definitely a bad day, I'm like, fuck you, you know?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, totally.
And I'm like that all the time. I've done that to like, again, like my own family members without realizing it. Cause I'm like, who the fuck are you in my mentions? You know what I mean? Cause that's the energy that you have that day on the internet. Like,
yeah, I mean, look, again, trust me, this is not anything other than the fact that I just know my audience would roast me if I did not bring it up. So
no, I know, not to belabor it. Don't worry. It's all good. It's all good. I think I unblocked you. I do like charity unblocks where I just like mass because I block tens of thousands of people, so it's probably hundreds.
Look, if I had your mentions, I would be blocking a lot more people too. And you know, as much as I would like to say no, there's no a misogynistic aim of it. I don't have these problems. I have a slight sliver. Now, granted, I have a sliver of the audience, but I have about 6 months of the year for which we are in the middle of right now, where people will get very, very mad at me if because I cover more of the strategy and tactics of politics as opposed to a more moralistic version of it, that people will be very mad if I am not calling balls and strikes the way that they would like for me to call balls and strikes. And that's fine. I understand that's just part of the game, that people will call me a MAGA chud or a libtard or something like that, like for a brief window. You are somebody that I do think that if we are going to go back to brands, part of the reason why there is this a lot of noise and a lot of fascination, specifically with your relationship with Libs of TikTok, is because you guys both have very defined brands. This is something that beyond the kind of diametric element of like, oh, they're both millennial white women who have a center part. Like, there is just, you are the liberal leading tech reporter. She is the person that is out to destroy whatever she's out to destroy, and you guys have come in conflict.
Well, she's just one of the many grifters that I cover. I mean, it's funny that some people know me through that. A lot of people know me through my Mr. Beast reporting. I mean, that was that had its own blow up where I had all these YouTubers. I mean, PewDiePie made a video about me at one point. Like, it was a whole thing. Jake Paul, I reported very aggressively on him. Like, most influencers I go after are men generally, I guess. Yeah. But you know, like I cover people that all have their own audience. Every single person that I cover is also their own media company. So there's a lot of attention. And I think that's why when people say, like, why is she always trending? Like, why do I have to hear about her? It's like, because everybody I cover is going to respond with their own thing. And so it just ends up becoming.
Because it's also beneficial for them. Right?
Exactly.
Like there is a virtuous cycle to I'm being attacked by Taylor Lorenz, and so now that becomes its own thing. Drama begets drama.
Exactly, and I did even write about Drama Alert.
Well, you've been very, very kind with your time, and I hope this isn't the last time that we speak. But thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, go ahead and subscribe to User Mag on Substack, and then follow Power User on podcasts wherever you find them. Taylor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. And if you're a paid subscriber, I will never block you. No matter what.
I'll get on that. This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Guys, get that $99 deal. I swear, you know, this is by far the most popular thing we have ever done in terms of subscription on the site. I'm losing about $40 per person for the year on it. But I got to tell you, it just makes me feel good that so many more people are getting the bonus content because they are making the jump. So please head on over to TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Please sign up. And you want to know what? If you've got money problems, if you're, on the fence, if I can talk you into it, hit me up, theyoungamerican@gmail.com. theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Like Pennsylvania ballots, the date to ask for the $99 deal is today, as you are listening to this. A few other housekeeping things. If for whatever reason you're having a problem getting what you want, you have any questions, here's a quick FAQ. First, it doesn't appear like my card has been charged yet. Don't worry. Your card's going to be charged in the first week of November. If you were a Patreon subscriber and you jumped on that account that Substack made for you, that's when your card is going to be charged. Heads up also for the Patreon folks. You are going to get charged for one last week of the show, the last show that we did on Patreon in October. You will get charged for one of them. After that, that's that. You can do whatever you want with that account. I'm going to leave it open, but I'm not publishing to there unless it's to tell you to come on over to Substack. Second, I'm not getting the bonus episodes. For whatever reason, the custom RSS feeds that you guys got, I'm pretty sure it's because there was an issue with the URL with politics.com. It had a hiccup. So you should be able to permanently fix your custom URL that you enter into the podcatcher of your choice by just deleting it and submitting it again. Pain in the butt. I swear to God, this is the last time you guys are going to have to think about it. And I think that's it. Again, we're at 70% conversion 3 weeks in to this process. So we're at 3/4 of the way to where we need to go. 3/4 of the way through the month. That's good. Boy, would I love. Boy, would I love to get close to 100% by election day. So head on over there. Politics.com. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Let's get to your update. Stories we didn't have a chance to talk about in this big meaty episode. Vice President Kamala Harris will deliver a key speech at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. tonight, the site of former President Trump's January 6th rally, framing him as a danger to democracy. Her closing argument focuses on contrasting her vision with Trump's, portraying him as fixated on his enemies, while she has a to-do list for the country's future. Emphasizing a need to move past political divisions, Harris's campaign expects around 20,000 attendees with overflow crowd prepared near the Washington Monument. Following the speech, she will tour the battleground states in her final few days of this election. On Friday's edition of the program, we're going to be joined by our political troika, Michael Cohen, Tom Lobianco, and we will discuss exactly how salient this message is. I do believe that it's safe to say that this is the speech that Biden would have given. This is what Biden leaned on in 2022. This is ultra MAGA. This is fascism is on the march. Donald Trump is a Nazi. You need to make sure that you keep the barbarians from the gates. We'll talk more about it. I tend to believe that elections are about the future. And this is literally a monument to the past. This is about Donald Trump. And so if you believe that this is a referendum on Trump, that's the way you win, then I get it. I do. But you're also inherently betting that Donald Trump is not more popular than he's ever been. Because by aggregate, he is. But you are betting on that not being the case. You are betting on enough people believing that Donald Trump can never again stand behind the Resolute desk. Here's somebody that is hoping that happens. Steve Bannon, former Trump advisor, was released from federal prison early Tuesday after serving 4 months for contempt of Congress related to that January 6th Capitol riot. His return comes a week before Election Day, enabling him to resume his influential War Room podcast. Bannon told Axios he feels amazing and empowered, predicting a major win for Donald Trump in 2024. Bannon still faces fraud charges in New York State for allegedly deceiving donors in a border wall scheme. That trial is set for December. What can you say about Steve Bannon? Obviously a rabble-rouser, but he will be making the case to at least the MAGA faithful to turn out and vote. Finally, something that we just mentioned a little bit with Taylor Lorenz is the Washington Post and the fact that they decided to spike an editorial endorsing Kamala Harris for president. By the way, they're not alone. The LA Times is also not going to endorse Kamala Harris, and USA Today, nor the Gannett newspaper chain, is going to make an endorsement this year either. And in a editorial Monday, Bezos defended his choice, calling it a principled decision aimed at avoiding perceived bias and maintaining independence. This move has sparked resignations from 3 editorial board members who drafted an endorsement for Vice President Kamala Harris. Bezos denied any link of the endorsement being spiked with a recent meeting between former President Trump and Blue Origin CEO David Limp, saying that he was unaware and no candidate was consulted before he made his decision. Bezos argued that endorsements don't influence election, but do foster a sense of partisanship, which he believes compromises the paper's independence. He has also reportedly gave a mandate to his leadership at the Washington Post that they need to hire more conservatives. There need to be conservative voices going forward. I have said before, and look, Taylor, who is just on, has come from that world. I have not. It is personal for her. It's not personal for me. I believe, even though I don't see a spot for myself in them, I believe that the lead dogs of journalism, like the New York Times and the Washington Post, play very meaningful parts in the ecosystem that I think is more sustainable that is growing up now. They have an ability to set an agenda. They have an ability to take risks on larger scales that independent, scrappy creators like myself quite simply don't. Is this the way forward? We'll see. Obviously, many people, including many journalists, don't think so. They believe that this is a road to ruin. This is capitulating to fascism. Well, we'll have to wait and see. If that's true, all the other journalists that rang the alarm bell can tell me that they told me so at the labor camp. TakePoliticsSeriously.com, where you need to go if you want to support this show. A lot of stuff coming up. We have a big, another gigantic episode coming up on Friday. Bunch of special guests. And then we have our Sunday podcast, which will be the last podcast that we do on the feed before Election Day. And then Tuesday, Election Day, we will have our gigantic live special. We'll take you through everything. And then Wednesday, at some point, we will put together whatever we have and give you the news. All the news. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Let's go to Gabe Fleisher of Wake Up to Politics. Joining me is Wake Up to Politics is Gabe Fleisher. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. How are you?
You said in your newsletter this morning, as we write this, that you are calling a moratorium on the horse race. You can't make me, but please explain your rationale.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a piece last week that I called my pre-mortems, basically, for both campaigns. I basically wrote, if, obviously, none of us know if Trump will win or if Harris will win. basically my account of how if either of them win, what kind of demographic shifts or strategy changes will have accounted for that. And I kind of said to my subscribers this morning, like, that's the most I can really tell you. I mean, the polls, as you know, it shows 50-50. There's really, I mean, I'm sure we'll see more polls in the final stretch. Nate Silver's model will move a little bit one way or the other. But at the end of the day, I think most of what this race will hinge on has been pretty much locked in. And it felt to me, for this final week, I was really trying to think through what it made the most sense to be talking to my readers about and trying to inform them on. And it did feel to me, I've done a fair amount of horse race coverage throughout the campaign, covering the ups and downs. And it felt to me in this final stretch, I really wanted to hone in on kind of the policy differences between the two candidates. I've been spending the last few days interviewing a whole bunch of different experts from a whole lot of different issue areas, just trying to kind of really zero in on the two candidates' policy proposals. And I do feel like that felt to me like the most productive way to kind of spend this final stretch because, you can look at the polls and look at the forecast as much as you want, but there's not much change going on there.
Well, good luck on trying to find the policy analysis here, because in general, policy analysis in a presidential election is dicey because everybody is presenting things that are either entirely unrealistic or just absolute fantasy because you want to get people into the booth. But now, not only are the policies wild, but also they barely kind of exist. Everything's just like a bumper sticker. We're not even getting the policy proposals that are totally unrealistic.
I think that's true for sure, and that's definitely been a takeaway from talking to all these different experts. I mean, just the vagueness of both candidates. I mean, if you look at, the Trump campaign, I've been spending time looking. It's interesting. We've been looking at both the platform, the two-party platforms.
Yeah.
And then as far as, the Trump campaign issues page on the website, that's pretty much it. And if you recall, the Republican Party platform was basically a bunch of different bullet points of one sentence each. Not much else there. Interestingly, though, I don't know if you remember, he did during the primaries this series of what they called Agenda 47 videos.
Yes.
There's a little bit more substance there, including some ideas that I feel like, frankly, have kind of fallen out of the conversation entirely that I had kind of forgotten he had proposed. So there's some stuff there. The Harris campaign had a pretty meaty economic policy agenda, meaty in that it's a lot of pages. It's also fairly vague in a lot of different places. But then beyond economy, I mean, I covered immigration this morning. Obviously she's clung to the bipartisan border bill. That's pretty much it. If that doesn't pass, she's really never said what she would do in immigration. And I think it's true of both candidates. They haven't said a whole lot, but I do think it is important, even to your point, the fact that most of what they're proposing in this stretch is not going to actually happen. But it's still, even aspirationally, to look at what these two candidates, if they were given kind of full power in Washington, if Congress was what they want it to be, to look at what the full slate of what they would want to achieve is, I think, still revealing and tells you a lot about the two candidates, even acknowledging the fact that most of it won't actually pan out.
It's very interesting that it feels to me we're back here for a third consecutive presidential cycle where everything orbits Big Chungus. Everything is about Donald Trump. It is whether or not you believe he is good or he is bad. The opposition to Donald Trump, first Hillary, then Biden, now Biden/Kamala, have defined themselves and their issues basically on what Donald Trump wouldn't do. Here's the alternative of what he would do. It worked once. It didn't work another time. Does it surprise you, before we get to whether or not it works, does it surprise you that Kamala hasn't painted herself more as, no, this is the Kamala future, just not the not Trump future?
It does, actually, because frankly, it's a shift for Harris. I mean, if you take the last 9 years of American politics, the really only period that was consistently not about anyone other than Trump was the very beginning of Harris's campaign. That was the days of joy and the days of the big rallies and everyone consolidating behind her. And even right before she picked Tim Walz and right after, they really were signaling this effort to kind of really move away from, what had been Hillary and certainly Biden's rhetoric on Trump. It's kind of a threat to democracy, all this stuff. They were really trying to minimize him instead of making him out to be this big threat. Anyone who's picked up a newspaper in the last few days can see that is no longer the strategy. So I do think it's surprising, but if you look at, you're right, it failed once in 2016, but in pretty much every election cycle since then, Democrats have had a fair amount of success with exactly that strategy. Here's why you should be afraid of Donald Trump. So it's surprising in that it's a different strategy than we thought Harris was going to take at the beginning of the general election, But in the kind of history of Democrats running against Trump, it's not that surprising in that it's mostly been a fairly successful strategy, at least in the battleground states.
It has certainly been very, very effective when Trump is not on the ballot.
True.
Running against Donald Trump without Donald Trump there is very successful. Again, 50-50, it's your glass half full, glass half empty solution on the other side of it. Let's take a look at Trump. I made the argument on Substack Monday with our bonus episode that the question now is whether or not there's no question that the Trump campaign is confident. The question really is whether or not they are going to be looked at as orchestrating a very, very well-run campaign or that they were overconfident and choked this away, or maybe didn't have a shot to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point I was making in those pre-mortem pieces the other day. Like, it is always funny to me to think, like, it's really whether 100,000 people, like, decide to get off the couch election day or how they're going to vote is going to determine whether, like, as actually you say, the Trump campaign is looked at as these kind of way too overconfident, just totally misplaying their hand, or these geniuses who shepherded Trump back to the White House, and it's just like this thinnest little line that separates those two very different narratives from being the case. And I do think it's true. I mean, it's interesting. I think, early in this campaign, the Trump campaign played it very safe, played a very orchestrated campaign against Joe Biden, very, message tested, and Trump really, for like one of the few times in his political career, like stuck to his lines. And like, if you look at his debate against Biden, one thing I don't think gets enough discussion, obviously very overshadowed by the fact that Biden did so poorly in the debate.
And Biden's brains leaked out of his nose.
Precisely, but Trump also stayed very on message for Trump. Grading on a curve, but talk about immigration, talk about inflation. Like, where has that gone? I think Harris entered the race, and that just like totally scrambled it for him. And just from that very beginning stretch where he suddenly was talking about questioning her race and all those things, and then suddenly you see a straight line from that to Madison Square Garden, where you had all of the surrogates, like none of them were on message, and all of them just throwing out these wildly different inflammatory rhetoric. And I do think, maybe we'll look back and say they did that was smart. They did that because they didn't need to be catering to independent swing voters, moderate voters, because they had it in the bag already. But not a lot of the public polling suggests they have it in the bag right now. So clearly, it feels like they're taking risks that they don't necessarily can't afford to take, and he can't afford to take. His freedom's on the line in this election in some ways. Personally. And it doesn't always feel to me like he's running that way. Like he's running like someone who has so much on the line in this election, which he does. But he seems like he's kind of just throwing stuff at the wall.
Well, let's take the other side of that, though. Here's something that he hasn't done for the first time in running for president. Fired his campaign leadership. They have been consistent throughout this entire process. Now, there's a question of when Corey Lewandowski came on.
Right. With the asterisk that it kind of seems like he tried to, but failed. But yes.
But he has not been shy about firing his campaign leadership in the past, in the previous two elections. This time, Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita have maintained their control over it. He is running events that are politically kind of gobsmacking. The crowds in Coachella, California, the crowd in Madison Square Garden, where he's wanted to run a rally for a very, very long time. He packs that place in. Now, what people say on the stage is where you can focus on it, but there is this 50,000 foot view that you're like, well, look, this campaign looks like that Donald Trump is, I think, unquestionably the defining political figure of the last 10 years, and he's acting like it in what will be his crowning achievement. Whether or not that happens, we will all find out together over the next week.
I think there's no question, and I think, obviously one thing these two candidates have in common is they want Donald Trump to be the defining figure of this election. I
Yes!
I just, I would, if you talk to Harris people, they're a lot less confident than Trump's people that is a good strategy for Trump. I do think in terms of the rallies, I interviewed a few weeks ago a professor who studied kind of campaign visits and the effects of campaign visits. I do think you're right. Like, these are very gobsmacking, impressive rallies in interesting states. And he came away with an interesting conclusion in his research going back several election cycles that basically campaign visits don't mean much, in terms of where you're visiting. Kind of basically puncturing the narrative of like Hillary Clinton should have gone more to Wisconsin.
She should have went to Wisconsin, yeah.
Actually, his finding was where they campaign doesn't matter much. And so by that logic, Trump, why not play Madison Square Garden? Why not go to Coachella? All those things. But the other thing that I was talking about with him is, and yet, it's almost always the narrative when you have a losing candidate. So again, to me, it plays to the fact that they're not playing it safe. And right now, playing it safe would be staying in Michigan, staying in Wisconsin, staying in Pennsylvania, just tending to those battleground states. Maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't. The political science research is honestly kind of mixed on that. But we know if he loses on November 6th, or probably more like November 10th, whenever we find out, if he does lose, that's going to be one of the things that's blamed, is why weren't they just focusing on the battleground states, just like Clinton? And so it is a risky strategy, again, especially with a candidate who has an unusual amount on the line in this election, to just kind of be like, playing things so risky. It's a striking strategy, but you're certainly right. It's painting this narrative. It's keeping him in the news. It's making him into this kind of big defining figure. And obviously, according to the polls, it very well could work. It's, certainly by any stretch, it's very credibly could end up paying off.
Where do you sense the enthusiasm is? Because, I've had this thing anecdotally, right? And so I live in mostly blue areas. You're in DC, which tends to be a blue area. When I talk to not political professionals, regular people that I know that are left of center, almost uniformly now, they're like resigning themselves to Donald Trump winning. They do not seem super excited to go out and vote. They don't really have a connection to Kamala. And you look at some of these early voting numbers, and granted, I've said this before, you are a sick person. You are a degenerate gambler betting on preseason football if you are paying attention to early voting. But some of the trends, should they hold, are dark for Democrats, and would be indicative of an enthusiasm gap. What is your read on that?
I mean, I don't disagree with you in terms of clearly the vibes. I think if you talk to a lot of political journalists and political professionals, are gaining more and more confident about a Trump victory. Certainly Republicans are very confident about a Trump victory. I don't think you're wrong in terms of the vibes of who people think is going to win. I guess, I'd be curious if the people you're talking to, my guess is most of them are still going to be casting their ballots just the same. And so I don't know that there's any evidence that sort of confidence has, affected how people are actually going to vote. Something that I find kind of interesting, I've been getting, I get emails from readers all the time, or, you'll see people complaining about, Nate Silver's model underrating,
Yes.
Harris's odds or things like that. Ironically, and certainly the Harris campaign feels this way. What I don't understand is, generally, or oftentimes, candidates do not benefit from that sort of overconfidence. You don't necessarily want your candidate. You don't necessarily want people to think your campaign is winning. And I find it interesting that so many liberals are so upset that other people don't feel like their candidate is winning. And you see the Harris campaign is kind of no, that's good. We want to be seen as the underdog. We don't want people to think, be so overconfident that they don't vote. But then there's also the other end of the spectrum where they're so, resigned that people don't vote. My guess is we're at kind of neither ends of those two spectrum. I think we're somewhere in the middle, where I do think most, at least according to the polls, certainly, there's pretty evenly matched levels of enthusiasm between both candidates' camps. I don't see, I think there's no question that's where the vibes are, but I don't see much quantifiable evidence that that's really affecting people's likelihoods to vote.
Let's talk about the quantifiable evidence, because this is a fascinating, the one thing that is not the same compared to the last two times that Donald Trump has run for president is that in both of those elections, he was a very, very, very heavy underdog in terms of the polling that you saw outside the margin of error leads in the swing states and certainly in the national election. Gabe, I saw something that, considering your young age, I don't even want to put how old you were before anything like this has ever happened, a polling average that had red on it on Real Clear Politics yesterday. It was a Donald Trump 0.1 in the national the national average. That's shocking. That's something that would not have happened since 2004, 20 years ago. And yet it leads the Democratic side to be on the other side of this coin for the first time in 8 years, which is the polls are hurting. They are overestimating Donald Trump. This is 2022 over again. How do you make this new flipped polarity when it comes to polling?
I mean, I think you're right. I mean, Donald Trump, there's no question, is polling better than he ever has since he's been in politics. I think there's two ways to read it. I think either A, he is gained more
legitimately
support.
more popular. Yeah.
Legitimately at the height of his political career, more popular than ever, or that pollsters, these issues that we know pollsters have had for the last 8 years in trying to quantify Donald Trump's support, that they finally kind of fixed the issue. Was the issue education, polarization? Was the issue not waiting by recalled vote, as we know some pollsters have? Was the issue just not reaching enough Trump voters? Now a lot of pollsters are using new methods, not just, calling people on their landline, try to reach Trump voters. Now there's not COVID to try to, mess with the response rates. Maybe pollsters have just figured out how to quantify Donald Trump's support, not that it's just risen. I think it's hard to know which one of those two stories is true.
It's impossible to know right now.
It's impossible to know. It's interesting, I do keep seeing certainly conservatives who are very confident how the election will go based on the fact that Kamala Harris is running so far behind how Joe Biden, for example, was polling in 2020. But of course, the only relevant thing there is that polling was wrong. That wasn't where Joe Biden really was in 2020.
Yeah.
So, to me, to me, it is a great sign of confidence, at least to me, in the polling that that Donald Trump's support is much closer to where it was in 2016 and 2020 in the actual elections. That the polls seem to have gotten a little bit better at estimating Trump's support, but it would take only a little bit change of that for it to be an overestimation. And I don't know if you saw this morning, there's a piece in Good Authority by political scientist out of Vanderbilt, who is looking at the very slight changes in the poll weightings, and it's just really, it's not much. And NBC did a piece on this too recently, where you just take it from you just dial up a few more percent of women voting, a few less men, and suddenly like a tied race is Harris plus 4, and then you do the opposite, Trump plus 4. And so these are just really minute decisions that can have really big effects on the polls and then the polling averages. So are they fine-tuning it right? Are they fine-tuning it wrong? Or is it just too finely tuned to even be one of those two things? I think it is hard to say. At the end of the day, all we can really say is the polling shows either one is really an equally credible winner.
Here's what I see, and that is Senate candidates in Rust Belt states running ads that not only, they haven't mentioned Kamala Harris or the word Democratic Party for months, right? But now they're openly mentioning Donald Trump and working with Donald Trump on a bipartisan basis. We can say that the polls are what they are, and we can understand that there's probably another universe of internal polls that probably tell various different stories. Whatever is happening, whatever is being read behind the scenes is something that shows Sherrod Brown and Tammy Duckworth and Alyssa Slotkin that they need to run more to the center, if not to the right, in the final few weeks of this election. And that's something that, to me, it's all right, I'm paying attention to that, because if there's one thing that I know for sure, Joe Biden would still be on this ticket if down ballot candidates were comfortable with him up there.
Yeah. No, I think, and that is a valuable thing to pay attention to. I mean, certainly with, you mentioned Baldwin and Slotkin, of course, Sherrod Brown, different candidates have different races. Sherrod Brown, is running in a state that we know Donald Trump will win. So there's no, that would be the only.
Yeah, I meant more Bob Casey, Bob Casey than Sherrod. Sherrod Brown's been running MAGA for the last 6 months, but Bob Casey has been trending more there.
But yeah, and I think that is certainly a reasonable indicator. I suspect, I wouldn't be shocked if that's the type of ads they'd be running at the final stretch of any sort of election. I mean, trying to burnish their bipartisan bona fides, trying to prove they're moderates. I think, there's an extent to which we could read a little too much into that versus just, I think that is smart political messaging, reaching what we know are universes of, a lot of swing and moderate voters. But you're right. I mean, clearly there are no signs to take that Democrats are feeling good about this election and are feeling particularly confident. There's plenty of signs to feel that way about Republicans, and I think that's certainly evidence we can kind of add on to the polling evidence. But at the end of the day, nothing we can read.
Well, unless you're Alan Lichtman. Alan Lichtman's got 13 keys that show that Kamala Harris is.
Then why even have the election in that? Then why?
I mean, he also said the keys were going to elect Biden. That didn't seem to work. But
don't mention that. Don't mention that.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. All right. That's a whole nother thing. A whole nother Lichtman conversation that can have. What are you looking at? So obviously you're writing more on the policy side, but you're also following all this. What are you following? What are you following?
I mean, I do think the advertising, as you say, is a valuable thing to be watching. Looking
Yeah.
at the messaging that's in the advertising, which is often not the messaging that is, geared at trying to get national headlines and necessarily
Yeah.
what they're talking about their rallies. I think that is often a tell, as you bring up, of what the candidates actually want kind of voters in the key states to be paying attention to. In Harris's case, that is a lot more talk about the economy and these kind of pocketbook issues than anything, any of these kinds of threat to democracy talk. That's definitely been getting a lot of news coverage. In Trump's case, interestingly, that's been a lot of stuff about, a lot of those trans advertising. So I think that's definitely something to watch. I'll be curious to see. We've definitely seen Harris really try hard to reach independent Republican voters. Be interested to see if there is some sort of last minute endorsement waiting.
Lord.
I'm skeptical, but you never know. I think that's certainly something they want.
You think what, W?
I'm skeptical that it's going to happen. But
Well, also, it's like, what more juice is there to squeeze? Is there somebody who's like, oh, I love Liz Cheney, and I love Dick Cheney, and I love Alberto Gonzalez, but I'm really, really, really on the fence. I'm waiting for George W. Bush to tell me to vote for a Democrat. Like, I've been baffled by this from the beginning. Look, if you want to have her out on the campaign trail with a Republicans for Kamala PAC or something like that does satellite events and is going to certain places that you can micro target, I get it. I have no idea why they are hugging the Cheney family as tight as they are.
I mean, I think it's all a matter of degrees. I think you're right. Is there a huge universe of Bush voters out there? No, but is there a small slice of Haley voters somewhere that endorsement or
that didn't already vote for Biden though? That's the thing. It's like I saw the thing today. It's like, oh, if we can get 5 to 10% of the protest vote for Haley in Pennsylvania, you're telling me that those people that went and voted for Nikki Haley after she had already pulled out voted for Trump in 2020? I don't think so.
Is you do have to remember the 2020 election was before January 6th. It was before the war in Ukraine, something a lot of those voters care about a lot. I think there's some out there. I agree with you. We're not talking about huge universes here. I mean, you look at the comment about Puerto Ricans yesterday that the Harris campaign was clearly very pleased about. Is there so many Puerto Rican voters in these swing states? No, but there's tens, hundreds of thousands. It could matter. I mean, you see Harris doing a lot of media in the final stretch with black men. Also, to your point, not a good sign of how they're feeling. If in the final stretch, focusing on black men is kind of a clear tell of how Democrats are feeling if they're doing so much messaging towards African American voters. But again, what all it needs to be is you just push the dials up a little bit more to that same point about the polling. We see it. You see it also in the actual election results. Just push these dials up a little bit more.
That will be the biggest plate of crow I'm going to have to eat. Will be if Kamala Harris is the next president of the United States and we can meaningfully say that the Liz Cheney press tour was part of the reason, because it doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but we don't know. We don't know. They're very, very highly paid political professionals, Gabe. We're just barking dogs on the internet.
This is true. And the other thing I will say about it, and I agree with you, I think it's not clear to me that is going to be an effective strategy. I think you're right. I think there's a lot of fair questions to be raised there. And certainly, if you're a political committee, you might hope to have more popular surrogates than Dick Cheney. But I do think an interesting thing to note here is I don't think it is just about, I take your point about the Haley voters, but I don't think it's actually just about people who literally voted for Nikki Haley, or even Republicans, frankly.
Yeah.
I do think, something that we see again and again, you see this in polling, you see this in political science research, a critical mass of American voters, they're moderates, they're independents, they at least call themselves independents. A lot of them actually vote really reliably for one party or the other, but do appreciate this idea of a president working across the aisle. I don't know if you saw her interview with Norah O'Donnell. The very first thing, when asked, what she would do to get to do in Congress, the very first thing she starts talking about is finding common ground, bipartisan common ground.
Sure, yeah.
I think a lot of political professionals kind of mock that because a lot of people don't really necessarily believe in that sort of bipartisanship, think of how polarized things are. But the truth is there is a lot of voters that just that kind of fuzzy, gauzy kind of sense of bipartisanship does appeal to, and that are moderates and kind of do want to see the government just kind of working in that kind of cooperative way. So even people who aren't literally Haley voters or George W. Bush super fans, of which there are not many, I do think just the idea of a Democrat campaigning with a Republican, I think potentially appeals a lot more people than you think. And it's, by the way, the same reason why Donald Trump in the final stretch is hugging Tulsi Gabbard in RFK Jr. It's
Yes.
the same
Oh.
message of unity, bipartisanship. So I do think it's something that works, even if, again, RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard also not like cross-cutting really popular figures, but it's more the idea of that as kind of, bipartisan unity.
I would love to really stack it up when we get the numbers to really stack up, like who is a more effective surrogate to cut into the rivals' base, Liz Cheney cutting into the right or Tulsi Gabbard cutting in to the left, because I think that they are very, very interesting kind of mirror images of each other. RFK Jr. as well, although he's in a weird horseshoe theory, like a place. We'll see where all that winds up shaking up. Okay, Gabe, I've been asking everybody. There's 4 ways that I see that this election ends.
Okay.
All right. On the rosiest side for the Republicans, it is Pax MAGA. This is the red wave that crowns, again, Donald Trump's 10 years in politics. We see not only a sweep of the swing states, but a big flip in the Senate. We're talking Senator Kerry Lake. Even the more edge cases that have been, fears of ticket splitting, big win there. One step to the left of that is what I'm calling the Democratic Civil War. This is Donald Trump narrowly wins the Electoral College. We get a few flips of the Senate, but not as many as we might think. And then the Democrats win the House. Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, which of course causes just explosive chaos in the Democratic Party, because now it is out and out proof that it was never the message. It was always the leadership. Now who gets to lead the Klan? Everybody fights for the next 4 years. Let's cross over the meridian line. This is the Kamala Harris positive side. She wins the presidency narrowly. Democrats win the House narrowly. But because of the map, Republicans take the Senate. That is unburdened by what has been my scenario. And then Rose sends her regards. This is blue skies for the blue team. Not only does Kamala Harris just blow out, it turns out abortion. That's the only thing that mattered. It always mattered the entire time. Doesn't matter who's at the top of the ticket. Kamala Harris wins all the swing states. They have a miracle. Colin Allred, senator in Texas. Mariska Powell, senator from Florida. They hold off the nightmare map in the Senate, and they win the House. Of those 4, which do you find to be the most likely, in your educated opinion?
I think, and this may be somewhat of a counterintuitive take, or at least for a lot of people these days, I think most, honestly, if I were to just rank them, I'd say most likely would be, I do think Harris slight edge. It's basically tossed up. Harris slight edge for the presidency, but then Republican Senate. So I'd say that scenario is the most likely, followed by the completely red scenario, followed by, I would say, Trump, or Trump red, but House, White House and Senate red, House Democrat, followed by least likely, complete blue wave.
We actually have odds on this now. I found that there is a poly market market.
I'm sure it does not agree with that ranking I just laid out. But.
No, well, it actually. So they have their most likely now, and again, this is the French crypto trader, so take it for whatever you will. I know everybody's got a thing on poly market these days, but Republican sweep is their most likely at 47%. They have Kamala as the president. Democratic House, Republican Senate is the next most likely at 20. So it's just flipped. They have the top 2 flipped. Then Republican president, Republican senator, D House at 15, and Democratic sweep at 13. So those are the top 4. My scenarios are the top 4 on poly market, but they have the Republican sweep. But then again, considering a $28 million bet just came in, 3 days ago on Trump to win, that is probably not that surprising.
And what do you say?
I will be revealing this Friday.
Oh, okay.
This Friday.
Okay.
This Friday. After all, I need to hear my learned friends. My learned friends. I need all their counsel. I will be making my final picks, and then also my big live stream for election night. We're gonna have 4 piñatas. And as the scenarios fall out of possibility, we'll be breaking the piñatas. Because I don't think we're going to have a winner. But I do think we'll be able to rule out at least a few of these a few of these scenarios by the time that the end of the end of the election.
I will say, having done those kinds of, I did those two premortems, which I encourage everyone to read. I hopefully did what I tried to be the steelman case for kind of both. I didn't take all four scenarios, but just of the two presidential scenarios. I do think, like, if it was like a pure, like, messaging, like, you know, all of that, I do think Donald Trump would have the edge of the presidency. I do think there's reason to believe, just based on polls, like, if every single person voted, like, maybe I think Donald Trump would have the edge if, you know, all registered voters were casting ballots. I do think, though, you know, considering how premised his strategy is on unlikely voters, on turning out very low propensity voters, and then also based on just what I'm hearing from people on the ground from both parties, people who are on the campaign trail, and just not seeing Trump, the Trump campaign, or kind of these affiliated acts in the levels needed to turn out those sort of low propensity voters, I that is why, to me, I kind of tip more just slightly towards that Harris scenario, still with the Republican Senate, but the Harris scenario, just because I do think if your whole theory of the case is premised on these kinds of people, you know, turning out to vote who almost never vote, like, sure, go do that. That's risky, but then you have to match that up with the actual, you know, kind of, you know, have a lot of money and a lot of resources parked at just getting those people out to vote.
Ground game is there. I mean, in the word cloud of Harris wins, the two biggest things are polls herded, and ground game. Those are the big silver linings for Harris. Whereas, you know, you pointed out for Trump that his ground game is something that, like, I think if he wins, we're gonna have another.
Will be a hero, and Elon Musk.
Well, yeah. I mean, also we're gonna have a conversation about exactly how important ground game is, which I feel like is kind of underrated. Nobody wants to talk about it now. That Biden had almost zero ground game in 2020 and pulled out more votes than Obama. Now,
with a coalition that wasn't as premised on low propensity voters as Trump.
That's true. But yeah, I don't know. It's and then on the Trump side, it's going to be interesting to see, did everybody just gaslight themselves because for the first time in 3 cycles, the Trump campaign had mainstream media outlets saying, yeah, looks like he might win. You know, that's something very, very rare. And maybe they just got high on their own supply there. We will find out all together. Thanks to the great wisdom and writing of Gabe Fleisher, Wake Up to Politics. Where can people get it?
WakeUpToPolitics.com on Substack, just like you.
Hell yeah. And you'll be able to get it now. This is something I love about Substack is in the email that comes along with this episode, there'll be a little subscribe button right there. Right there. You can find it. Gabe, thank you so much.
Always good talk to you. I'm excited for the pinatas. I'm looking forward.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I got to go get them, too.
There you go. Good talk.
One of the biggest stories of this election is going to be the gender gap. And here to talk about the male side of it, because we have had a lot of conversation about the female side going to Democrats, is a man who has written a book on the subject, Mark Sutton. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to be here, Justin.
You know, it's very funny because we had scheduled this interview, and literally yesterday, a friend of mine sent an Instagram post about how demoralized men have become, and it included multiple quotes from you and your book about this very, very subject. And so it is certainly a sign that this is a worthwhile conversation if that happened organically. Please talk about the theory of the case that you have in your book.
Okay, so the title of my book, it is from a Democratic perspective, as you say, although I've got a lot of Republican friends who have read it and said, Mark, you make good points that actually apply to either party. But my basic point is if you look at the exit poll data, which is where we can measure the gender gap, going back to 1972 up till now, we see that gender gap really started in 1980, and Republicans have been doing much better among men. And Democrats have been doing much better among women. And that has been pretty steady. I mean, it's gone up and down a little bit, but that's been a consistent trend. So just using very simple logic, the Democrats should figure out a way to better appeal to men. Then they'll have a much better chance to win. Maintain their great support that they're doing for women and girls, supporting choice, things like that, all the great things they do for women and girls, which I reiterate that multiple times. You can support multiple groups of people at the same time and in meaningful ways, and that's what we need to do. Unfortunately, what the Democrats have not done is given that same support to men and boys. I think there's this something known as the apex fallacy, which is, well, all presidents have been men, therefore we don't need to worry about men and boys. But go over to Oakland underneath the I-80 bridge and ask the homeless men living in a tent if it matters that Joe Biden happens to be male or not. Does that really affect them?
Not particularly. No,
not particularly. Exactly. So, the Democratic Party has what I call the Democratic disconnect with men. Like they just can't see it. Like they've just been so told for a long time that men and boys are the ones who are privileged. Therefore, they can't have any issues, or any issues they have are just individual and is due to individual circumstance. And that the party doesn't really need to directly address those. So I challenge that, and I think it's a mistake. I think they need to do the opposite. So, for instance, let me give you one example of the Democratic disconnect in action. So there's so many opportunities this year for the Democrats and the Harris campaign to do a better job of talking about men and boys and their issues in a way that still is supportive of women and girls. And also, by the way, those are non-binary or trans as well. And so one of those was, one of the things I was really looking for all year was the party platform. So the Democratic Party platform came out during the DNC. Now, this was actually written during the time when Biden was a candidate. So it was kind of more his and hers. But again, by that time, she was a candidate. So
if I remember correctly, there were still references to Biden in the actual document by the time that they put it forward.
Yeah, surprisingly, they didn't even do any minor text edits to just reflect the new candidate. But be that as it may, she was a candidate at the time, and it's her party. I believe she's responsible. And it had the word women in there, women and girls, 82 times. Yeah. And it had the word in there, men or boys in there, only 4 times. And of those 4 times, 3 of them were the word men and women, so that's neutral. And then one of them was talking about how Trump hired too many male judges and not enough female judges, which is a legitimate point. That's a totally valid point, but it's not a point that's supportive of men and boys, right? That's still a point that's supportive of men and girls. So their entire platform only focuses, to the degree that it focuses on gender, it only focuses, on women and girls. And then here we are, a couple weeks before the election, they're like, oh my gosh, we need male votes. And then they're trying to do all this stuff at the last second. And I say, you can't be a devil all week and an angel on Sunday. This should have started a year ago. In my blog a year ago, I said, when I first started it, I said, my number one advice for the Democrats in the 7 swing states, have a strategy to appeal to male voters in those 7 states. That's the most important thing they could do all year. They could have talked about men in the, granted, this was Biden's race for the first 8 months.
Much of the year up until the late summer,
Yeah, so it was his race, so that was another wrinkle that got thrown in. And I understand that's a logistic challenge for the Harris campaign. But, there were so many opportunities. The State of the Union address, he could have just mentioned something. And when I say mention something, people say, what could they have mentioned? Something very non-controversial, like men's health. So, men are dying right now 5.9 years earlier than women. And even Harvard Magazine came out and said, wow, this gap is widening. And we don't know why. And we should really study this more. There's even a bill put forward by a member of the House of Representatives from New Jersey, Representative Payne, the Men's Health Awareness and Improvement Act. And they could have just said, hey, we support this act. This is great. And sadly, Representative Payne himself passed away this spring at the age of 65. So,
oh, wow.
So how ironic is that? What a perfect opportunity it could have been. I wrote this in my blog. Biden, during the State of the Union, he could have said, look, this is going to be a bill that we're going to pass, and we're going to support men. I don't think that would turn off women voters. I really don't.
Is part of the issue that obviously we have had a lot of conversations about gender and gender equality over the last 6 years, right? Or maybe more than that. Really, I mean, since the Trump era, you saw, the Women's March immediately after Donald Trump won. The idea that a female candidate had lost brought a lot of stuff to the fore. Cultural issues like Me Too that have been very female focused, that predatory men have gotten away with things for too long. Let's shine a light on it. On the other side of that, not only do you have things that you've said, that there has been a gender divide for a long time amongst these two parties when it comes to electoral politics. But you even have very left-wing commentators like Hassan Piker saying, hey, there's not really a male-dominated space that doesn't have conservative-coded influence almost up and down it, be it lifting weights or sports or gambling or anything that men like to do. It tends to have become more and more openly conservative coded. And I'll add one more thing to the mix. The idea of the male loneliness epidemic, that there is a loss of a sense of purpose, and the fact that I think, did suicide replace heart attacks as like the leading killer of men over 40 recently? Like there's some dark stuff here.
Yes, very dark stuff. Deaths of despair. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw all that into a gumbo pot and say, amongst that, if you were just looking at this from the cold crosstab light of getting a president or a senator elected statewide, from the Democratic side, what are they doing wrong beyond just not engaging with any of it at all? Or from the Republican side, what have they done right? Because it does appear that this male vote is not only coming more to the Republican side, but also it's eroding some of the key demographics that Democrats have relied on, including Latinos and Black voters.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I always think there's two aspects to this, right? You've got the content, the meaningful policy positions, which sometimes, policy wonks love, and people who really get into policy love, but maybe the average, not every voter necessarily reads through the party platform or things like that, right? And so they're not going to suddenly know that, but they'll sort of hear the reverberations. And the second thing you have is just the image type stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
So and they're both important, but you can't do the image type stuff without the stuff behind it. Okay, you can, and this is what the Democrats have done. As I mentioned earlier, they ignored men. Also in the budget, the 2025 proposed budget had the word women and girls 81 times, 0 mentions of the word men and boys in the entire budget. Okay, so it's clear that that's kind of what's happening in terms of these policy decisions. And then they come out with Tim Walz. By the way, I'm a native of Minnesota, so I've got San Francisco represented where I live now with Harris, and I've got Minnesota represented with Walz. So
you are very dialed into this ticket.
I feel very connected to this election. Yeah, absolutely. And so, Walz came out, and, when they showed that picture of him in the hunting rifle, and I had flashbacks to John Kerry in 2004.
Is this where you get a license to hunt?
Yeah, exactly. And then the worst of all was the 1988 Dukakis in the tank.
In the tank, yeah.
In the tank. And I call this man washing. And the Democratic Party is guilty of what I call man washing, which is like greenwashing, right? You know how corporations, they put an annual report with a picture of a duck in a lake somewhere. Meanwhile, they're polluting the entire planet, right? So the Democrats, I believe, are doing something similar with men, whereas they completely ignore men in their party platform and in their policies. And then they come out 2 weeks before the election and oh, here's our vice presidential candidate.
Coach
he coached a football team. Yeah, look at him with his buddies. Isn't he cool? And I think it rings kind of hollow to a lot of people. And so this gets back to what are Republicans doing right? I don't agree with all the Republican policies, and I don't agree with some of the types of rhetoric that I've heard out of policy. But in terms of appealing to men on kind of a gut level, I think they have done a good job of reaching men in a certain way. So, for instance, Senator Josh Hawley, he wrote a book on men and masculinity.
Yeah.
Now, there were some good things that I don't agree with everything in the book, but there are some good things in the book. He appeals to men's desire to have a sense of purpose, men's desire to be a provider. Every individual is different, and there's different ways of being a provider. There's different ways of having a sense of purpose. You could be an opera singer. That could be very masculine, I think. Yeah. You could be or you could be a warrior. You could be in the army. There's different ways to be masculine. There's different ways to have a sense of purpose. But Hawley's book at least acknowledges that. He at least says, hey, men, I'm listening to you. I'm here for you. And here's my view for what I think we can do in the government to support healthy manhood. You might disagree with it, but at least he puts something out there. So, when you hear some people on the Republican side at least talking about these things. Senator Marco Rubio, he put out a 40-page report about this, kind of along the same lines about men, and he was concerned that too many men were dropping out of the workforce and weren't working. Yeah. So then the question is, okay, what can we do about that? Great. So again, he's addressing a problem. He's addressing men, talking about, again, their sense of purpose. And, life isn't just about work. Life isn't just about making money. Some men feel that their wallet sometimes, and that's a different issue. But, in terms of government policy and stuff like, what can we do? At least it's approaching the male perspective. And so when they have some background like that, and then they do the kind of macho stuff with Hulk Hogan, ripping off the shirt.
Sure. Yeah.
And that kind of stuff. It's like, well,
Kid
Rock,
Rock,
we've actually...
Dana White, these very testosterone laden totems on the Republican side.
Yeah, exactly. So when they do those things, there's a little bit more behind it, I believe. Now, half the problem with the Democrats, too, I would say is just the messaging, because a lot of the Democratic policies actually do a good job of supporting men, but they're not bragging about it. They're not talking about how it works well. And, let me just give you one example that is so obvious, I wish I would talk about it more. Men's sperm counts are declining globally by over 50% over the last 50 years. In fact, a recent study from Israel said even over 60%. This is everywhere. All these microplastics. There's another study this year. Microplastics are getting into our, man bits down there. Yeah. And every single person studied had them. So they're everywhere. They're in our bodies. They're everywhere. It's declining sperm counts. 10% of men now have a problem having kids.
Yeah.
So why don't the Democrats say, we're the party of environmentalism? And guess what, man? This is good for you, too. Don't you want to have kids? Or if you have a son, don't you want your son to have kids so you have grandkids? Well, it's going to be harder because there's all this pollution. Now, the other party wants to keep polluting. We say, let's stop polluting.
Yeah.
Now, there's a masculine issue that focuses literally on men's virility. I mean, how much more masculine could you be? They
Literal
haven't mentioned
sperm.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. They haven't mentioned it once the whole year.
An actual seminal issue.
A seminal issue, exactly. And actually, I created something called International Sperm Count Decline Awareness Day, which is every June 30th, halfway through the year.
Okay. So. Well, everybody start counting. It's a very interesting thing to thread, because I don't know how much of this is a culture war issue and how much of this is a messaging issue. There's no doubt that the people that want to talk about these issues the most are culture warriors, and that what you would hear, and I'm sure some people are saying, is that, well, yes, Democrats have a problem with men because in the worldview of many Democratic politicians, the role of a man is to stop degrading the life of a woman, which they have done time immemorial, and now is their time to step aside, put your life over here. It is a woman that you might not know's job to go ahead and live the life that you would otherwise want for yourself. I don't know how fair that is. I don't think it's particularly accurate for everything, but there's certainly at least a line of thought for men that the liberal worldview is not a place for them to succeed. It is, they are an impediment. They are an opponent in a liberal mindset.
Yeah, and I think it has to do too with gender roles. So you talk about masculinity and a time for men to step aside. And I think of it too in terms of gender roles. So like, what are the gender roles? In some senses, there are some more progressive men who say this is liberating. Guess what? You don't have to go work 60 hours a week to support your family and then be away from them the whole time. It used to be before all this remote work was possible. If you were going to work, you showed your love for your family by going out, slaying dragons, working whatever type of job it was, whether it was, could any type of work, and then coming home at night and on the weekends, maybe exhausted from your work. And that's how you showed love to your family, by providing and supporting. Well, maybe, there's a new way to look at it. Hey, we're all changing gender roles. So women who were more constrained to housework and raising children and that sort of thing, they have now been liberated to be able to work or, and have choice. I think the important thing for everyone, wherever you are on the political spectrum, is the best of all possible worlds is we all have a certain amount of choice. When if people together in a household, I mean, you can choose to get married or not because you don't have to rely on another person for money. If you do get married or partner up, you can, then choose, are we going to both work? Is one going to work? Is one going to stay home? Are we going to sort of balance the work and the children if we have children? Are we going to have one person, one person's making a really good job? Let's focus on your career and I'll do the other stuff. You have all these choices. Isn't that what America's about? It's about choice and about having this balance. And so, and I think in general, this change of gender roles is a good thing because it gives us balance. There are some men who don't want to be at office all week and just come home at night. And there are a lot of women, obviously, who love to work and, love to be productive. And that's an important part of their life. And it's a part of who they are as a human being. So that's great. So I think I see that as changing gender roles. And that's one thing you asked me about, again, about the Republican versus Democrat. I think the Republicans are still focused, we should all focus on that conservative, gender roles that we used to have. And what I say is there's nothing wrong with those roles. If a couple meets and they say, we want to get married, the man's going to work, the woman's going to, be the homemaker, and they're both happy with that, great. But don't assume that everyone has to live that way or that's necessarily the best way for everyone to live. We have all sorts of different families. We have multi-generational families. We have families that have, same-sex partners, blended families, people getting married, divorced, and then kids come together. We have this whole ecosystem of different things. And fatherhood is important for all of those different ecosystems, even households where there's not a father present. Fatherhood is a very important thing.
One of the culture war arguments that you hear a lot is that modern liberal thought has been dominated by an oppressor-oppressed dynamic. And that is something that has grown more specifically over the last 8 years. That in every situation, there is a party with power and there is a party that is without power, and that there is inherently a friction between the two. That one is holding the other down, the other is fighting for more of that pie. There is no more elemental example of this, I would say even more than race, than gender. That there is in the view of certainly some, depending on whichever wave you want to pick of feminist thought, there is the idea that men are either by active harm or complicity holding down the freedoms of women. Obviously, this has been litigated far more post-Dobbs. What do you make of that? Because that is where I think a lot of, certainly, independent men or men that are drifting rightward, that's where they see the hopelessness in the idea of liberalism right now is, I never signed up to be the oppressor. I guess even if I don't say anything, I'm the bad guy. Where do I find a home in this coalition?
I think that's a very good point. And I was going to say, in terms of that, it kind of comes from the Marxists, the oppressor class and the oppressed class. It's kind of developed maybe somewhat since then. But I just think that's not the best frame of reference to look at it. I don't think it's totally accurate. I mean, if you look at some historical photos from the last 150 years since we've had photos. Have you seen those soldiers from the Civil War they were soldiers in the North who were, fighting to save the Union and they were in prison camps. They come out, they're skeletons. Okay. These people were drafted. Is that privilege? And not to mention you can look at a lot of gory photos from there, all these people who died. Look at the Bataan Death March in World War II in the Philippines. Yeah. I mean, is that privilege?
Yeah.
Is that privilege to you? Have you seen the photos of the miners? These miners in Europe, they used to, in the early 1900s, they would go down a kilometer underground, hunched all together in tiny little groups. They go down. It would take an hour for this huge elevator to take down. They're all like clumped together in this pitch dark going down for an hour. Is that privilege? So I think the big mistake of that thinking is, again, it gets back to the apex fallacy. Yes, there have been gender roles that are very strict, and the people at the top absolutely have every single president has been a man. 75% of Congress is male, and like 90% of the Fortune 500 CEOs are male. Absolutely. So when women say, hey, we have an issue, we want more women in leadership positions, I say, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Let's do it. Okay, now here's some issues I have. Men are dying 5.9 years earlier than women. Can we have an Office of Men's Health? No. Well, why can't we do it both ways? That's why I say it's not a zero-sum game. We can support women, get more women in positions of leadership, support the right to choose. And we can also support men and support, by the way, men's reproductive rights as well. So it's not an either or, it's a both. And I don't think that oppressor-oppressed narrative, I don't think it's quite accurate. And as you mentioned, it's certainly not helpful because a lot of people say, hey, I'm trying to be nice to women and girls my whole life, and I'm just told by default I'm an oppressor because I happen to be male. I don't like that. A lot of people resent that.
Yeah. What I don't know is how open at least some corners of the Democratic power structure would be to amending that thought process. I mean, certainly you have seen, at least in this campaign, there has been, many would say, a belated and too late scramble to appeal to men. I don't know exactly how many men will watch Tim Walz's old football team come out on stage and say, yes, that guy. Now I totally understand. I think the way that you first came on my radar is because I wrote a piece on Substack about how to understand the modern voting man, specifically aged kind of 15 to 45, it is College Game Day. If you have not watched College Game Day and you've not understood the things that are talked about, even when they are not full focused, it is religious, with not afraid to be religious, but not explicitly religious. It is irreverent. Before Tony Hinchcliffe made jokes about Puerto Rico, the episode that I saw from Austin, Texas, he called a 19-year-old a prepubescent lesbian. So it is unafraid to be, jostled in terms of the comedic stuff. Right. It is a lot of exuberance. It is Pat McAfee taking his shirt off. And my joke was that, if Tim Walz really wanted to appeal to men, he would go on College Game Day and take his shirt off with Pat McAfee, because that would be at least speaking the language of, oh, okay, you are somebody that understands that this is fun. This is an interesting a place to be in. I don't feel that this Democratic ticket has particularly done it. And, I go back to a chance meeting I had with a lobbyist on Capitol Hill a couple years ago, where he was talking about how, and this was an age thing, but certainly it ran on gender lines too, that he felt that this is a Democratic lobbyist. He's like, they're hunting old men. This is just, we are the endangered species. There is a new generation that specifically wants old men out of this party, and they want to minimize where our relevance is. And obviously part of that is a future past element that happens in all societies. But I don't think it's a coincidence that it's no, we need the men. The men need to leave. The men are gone. And I don't know. I agree with you. It's probably not particularly helpful from an electoral perspective, but at the same time, if the superpower of the Democratic Party is women, then and Kamala Harris might win this election, how can you say that this wasn't a successful thing? Pound sand, boys. The women are voting at a higher clip.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. Well, and again, it goes to 2 points, and I say this in my book. There's 2 reasons why Democrats should do a better job of focusing on men and boys issues. Number one, because it will help them win, I believe. I think that'll help them get more votes. But the second reason is better policy. I would be saying all the exact same points I'm saying, even if I thought the Democrats were clearly going to win no matter what. If Harris were up by 10 points and this was going to be a landslide, I would still say she should have spoken more about men and boys, this whole campaign season. And, actually the fact that she is a female candidate, I think that opens the door for her. She actually has an opportunity to say things I think would have been harder for Biden to say. Because you're right. I think there is that, if Biden came and said, I'm going to do an Office of Men's Health, people might say, oh man, this is an old guy, do another thing for men. This is too bad.
Yeah.
But if you have a woman of color come out and say, you know what? We need an office, our men, particularly men of color, because we absolutely, and that's another thing I talk about in my book, racial inequities are absolutely clear. I follow the data. I'm a data guy. That, the data is absolutely clear on racial inequities in our country. So, just even on life expectancy, you have we talked about the longevity gap between men and women. There's also a racial longevity gap. So if you add those two together, an Asian American girl born in 2021 is going to live on average 24 years longer than a Native American boy born the same year. There's a 24-year life expectancy
Good
gap
Lord.
when you combine race and gender. Yeah. And so to ignore the gender aspect of that, I think is wrong, whether or not you're doing it to get votes or just trying to have better policy. The other thing is, the better off everyone's doing, the less crime we'll have, the less social problems we'll have. And so if you ignore certain groups of people, those people are going to have more social problems. And so, because men do commit more of the crime. And people say, because one of the other issues I talk about is prison industrial complex, or people also have been using the phrase mass incarceration, to describe that. And again, it's just like the life expectancy. You have a gender gap, and then there's also a racial gap. There's both. You see the inequities on both sides. And so if we really wanted to prevent that, I think we could focus on all men and boys is only going to help while still paying attention to the race and there's class issues, fatherlessness issues as well. So I think the answer to your question is, even if Kamala wins this, and I hope she does, by the way, but I know your listeners are neutral, and that's fine too. And
no. I'm neutral. The listeners are their own feral tribes. No, they will either boo or hiss at you or cheer depending on their own things. I'm the neutral observer.
Okay,
I am the unbiased truth angel.
Okay, so let's suppose the Democrats do well next week, and Harris wins by enough that the Republicans can't challenge it or whatever, so she wins. And say they win the House as well, but then they lose the Senate. It's a possibility, right? Because it's looking like they're going to lose the Senate. So there's still going to be a little gridlocked, even though it'll be much better than if it goes Republican, Republican, Republican. Then it's like a whole dire situation for Democrats, right? Because now they've lost they've already lost the Supreme Court. They're most likely going to lose the Senate. If they lose the White House and House on top of that, wow. So in that case, I think my point would be even stronger. But even so, it's like, hey, think if you guys had the Senate, then you could start appointing judges. Then you could get the Supreme Court back. There's still so much to go. Why stick with a strategy that has been middling, in recent years? So
I think the argument would be because it's righteous and it's just. This is a historic injustice that has been done to women and girls. And yes, there is attrition because, men need to be forced out of power to make room for a more just society.
But there's plenty of women and men in both parties too. So it's not like it's all women, all men. But again, we're either talking about the electoral side or the policy side, or what's the best policy. And I guess that goes back to before. You can help multiple groups of people at the same time. So and I'm not even saying it needs to be an even accounting year. I'm not saying if we have the word women and girls 82 times, then we need to have the word men. I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying have something. Have these are the issues. We think women and girls historically have been underserved by our government and our society. And we're going to focus more on that. I don't have a problem with that, but that doesn't mean you completely 100% ignore the other group of people and just pretend they don't exist and just literally not mention their name in the budget at all once. I mean, that's extreme. Just be a little more balanced. And that's, again, another thing I say in my book is I'm just calling for balance. Let's just have a little bit more of a balance in this discussion. That's all.
Which is funny because the argument for having a more aggressive position against men and for women is to create as you said, balance. The question is exactly who is looking at those scales and how they do it. I will say, Mark, that my concern beyond politics, societally, is on a class of male loneliness that I see more clearly now than I've ever seen in my entire life. Like it is interesting to me, troubling, I will say, to me, that at a period, I see more male loneliness in my life now than I did at the period where I would assume I would have seen it the most, in my like teens and 20s, when all men and boys are just adrift and they have no idea what they are doing. It's just all hormones and running your head into walls because you have no idea what left and right is. But now, and I don't know whether or not this is just a part of aging, but like I see it across the age spectrum. I see it with younger people, younger men and boys in my life. I see it with guys that are my age in their late 30s, early 40s, and it is bleak. It's not just like, hey, I've had a bad run of things, and I don't know where I'm at in my love life, and I haven't hit my goals that I wanted to do, and it's like across the spectrum of, if it's a more conservative, or if it's a more liberal thing, it's I'm lonely and it's my fault. And if it's on the more conservative side, it's I'm lonely and it's her fault. But on either side, it is something that I do worry about. And I've had like conversations with friends of mine where it's out and out been the conversation. Hey, men our age die because of suicide. Let's just make sure we check in on each other. That's a rough place to be. And I don't know. I think it's very easy to cast the conversation about women and oppressed repressed as kind of the villain of it. I don't know if that's the entire picture, but I do know that it's real. Like I have seen more of it in my life than I was expecting to it, and I am not on the hunt for it.
So that you've just noticed it among people that you interact with. That's interesting. Yeah. That's why, first of all, when I focus on the issues, I always say my focus is on male well-being. Yeah. Okay. It's about well-being. And so that epidemic of loneliness that you talk about, that is a classic example of where, so how can we have our men get together? I mean, there's talk there are still male spaces out there. It's not that there are none, but they are, sometimes harder to get to just because we are so virtual now all the time a lot, and people spend more time on their devices. And it would be great if, it's kind of ironic where you can be connected to anyone in the world at any moment, yet we have a loneliness epidemic at the same time. So there is an irony that's going on with that, but you hit on a really important topic. It's just incredibly important.
Yeah, it's I worry about it. I worry about it not only because when I listen to female conversations, it's not like they're talking about how awesome it is right now, right? Like you hear a lot about the dating world being a big jumbled mess, but partly technology gets a lot of the blame, but like it doesn't seem to me by any available metric, either anecdotally or looking at the raw data based on marriages or kids or anything like that, that things are particularly clicking well with the genders, like that things are harmonious. There are, if anything, it seems like things are kind of growing further apart every way that you look at it.
Yeah, and I think it is also good not to be too pessimistic about it. But I think there are a lot of people who get along and have healthy relationships too. There was a bill last summer in the Senate that a senator from Connecticut put out, the Social Connection Bill. I don't know how far that bill got. It didn't get passed. I know that. But so there are people recognizing this problem for sure, and I just would hope that people can find this balance. I mean, the world has changed technologically so quickly in the last 10 years with smartphones and everything. And here in California, one of our state senators put forward a bill to get cell phones out of schools for young kids. Like they want and I've seen heard of schools doing this. They put them in a lockbox so the kids get to take them around, but they're in a lockbox. But then they figure out how to get them out of the lockbox. I mean, you have a kid in a phone, they're going to find out how to get in there, right? But to be more personally connected, there's something about online communication too. There's some anonymity where you don't feel connected to the person. I think people are more likely to do bullying or to be mean to people, that they just see an icon on the screen. It's not a real person, and then their worst things come out, where I think when you're face to face with someone, there's a certain amount of politeness that kicks in instinctually.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I tend to be a defender of online spaces. I do believe that they're a net positive as opposed to a net harm, but I do agree that we're just in a shifting cultural norm, and there's I think hopefully we are just at a period where things have changed really fast. This is future shock, and as we continue to deal with it and understand it and have our arms wrapped around it culturally, that there will be a natural sort of mending point of it. But there's no doubt now that there are huge gaps between the genders in terms of what they're interested in, how they operate, and I think central to the continuation of our species, how they get together. Because without procreation, this is just a dwindling party.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that the gender gap in voting you're exactly right. I think that's just reflective of that larger cultural divide that we're seeing. I think it's just as part and parcel of the same thing. And you talked about dating, which is interesting because there is this kind of connection with the dating world and politics. There's a little bit of crossover kind of happening there where so for instance, I think some of these dating apps, Tinder, etc., there are so many people on these apps now. Somebody put a thing on Reddit where they had swiped whichever the way where you try to say yes to the person. They swiped right like 20,000 times and got 0 yeses out of 20,000, and they posted it. And okay, that's an extreme example, and I would suspect maybe the algorithm said if you swipe yes to everyone, we just kind of don't do anything. But it shows you how people are kind of grasping at straws sometimes. And I think that dating issue, when you have dating has become, instead of going up to somebody at an event where you have a mutual interest and start talking to them, I think I've heard from young people, they feel that's being aggressive now. You're being aggressive, and that maybe even crossing a line by if you go, hey, you're really pretty, could we go out on a date? Like, you can't say that anymore. You have to just be very, very careful. There are a lot of young men who are afraid to
terrified.
Approach. Yeah. And so then that makes, again, that's just another little thing that creates a little bit more isolation, right? Just one more piece of
And again,
puzzle.
the other side of this, which I'm sure some, female listeners are yelling into their phone, is like, well, yeah, you want to know what? Yeah, congratulations, there's guardrails. So now there's less creeps, and the creeps that do creepy things are now more rightly marked, which
is a good thing too, right? So, and I do agree with that. Again, and that's why I always bring it back to balance. It's not that we should just let anyone do anything they want, and it's not that nobody can do anything, right? It's finding this middle ground among this changing landscape. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and we're gonna see how it plays out on our national political combat. But in the meantime, I would recommend everybody read How Democrats Can Win Back Men. That is by our guest today, Mark Sutton. And you also have you write on Substack, correct?
That's right. It's called Men and the 2024 Election. And it's really just focused on this topic. This is what I'm focused on.
Prime time, baby. Prime time for you. And I'm sure there'll be some great breakdowns of everything as we understand where people actually voted next week. So I know I will be following all that. I encourage everybody listening to do it as well. Mr. Mark Sutton, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Justin.
And That'll wrap it up for us today. Politics, 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 written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. I want to thank Taylor Lorenz of User Mag. I want to thank Gabe Fleisher for Wake Up to Politics. I would like to thank Mark Sutton of How Democrats Can Win Back Men. Go get that book right now. All of them have Substacks. They will all be linked in the email that goes out with this show. If you'd like to send me an email about anything, it is theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Find and follow us for social media clips. Justin R. Young on TikTok, on Instagram, on X. You can find us on YouTube, Politics, 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 and you can, of course, hit our Substack, politicspoliticspolitics.com. If you appreciate the work we have put in over the last few weeks and you just want to hit us with a one-time donation, a little thank you, a little something in the old tip jar, paypal.me/payjury, where you need to go. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3Cash. You can send me anything you'd like in the mail. Post Office Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. Again, that is Post Office Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. You can always get our bonus content at TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $12 a month. Same $3 deal that we've always had. $3 a week. If you would buy me a cup of coffee once a week so I could give you 2 bonus hours of content, then this is the deal for you. And it's always $12 a month. None of the random $15 months anymore, because we're not going week by week. It is month by month. And again, I can't tell you enough. You will regret it. You will regret it if you do not take advantage of the $99 deal right now. 1 year. 1 year of content for $99. 150 episodes of the show. That's like 60 cents an episode available to you right now. So that's like very cheap coffee. That's not even you buying me a cup of coffee. That's you making a cup of coffee for me at your home and then giving it to me. And then, of course, we have our Titanic founding tier. This is just the most hardcore people. We used to be the Titanic $10 tier on Patreon where people were able to do $10 a week. Now, the way Substack works, they have you do it all up front, and we still have about the exact same number of people that are on this team. Oh, how lucky. How lucky am I? They go a little something like this. Pro Idiot, Meemaw to the Peepaw, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Jeremy. Oh, yeah, it's Adam. Chiller Tomatoes, Just Another Pilot, David, AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Will, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Matt, Matthew, The Borge B, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Phil, Andrew, Devon, Edison, Paul, Jerry, my mom, Gloria Young, a dog named Checkers, Berkeley, Stephen, John, and Ryan. You want your name on there? Head on over there. Get on in at the founding tier. If you'd like to be in the donor club that gets their name read at the beginning of every episode, just send me an email. I'll explain how to do it. It's, look, it's a lot of money, but if you want your name read on the show for a year, then it's the way to go. On Friday's edition, we will have the reconvention of Michael Cohen, Tom LoBianco, the man who wrote the book on the modern political campaign, and the newly scoop heavy 24site.com. They broke the Elon Musk super PAC story, the letter from the DOJ to the super PAC. What a stud. They join us. We go over our final thoughts on this election, and I reveal for the first time which of our 4 scenarios I believe will end this election. I'm agonizing over it, guys. I'm agonizing. There's 3 of them that I think are very much in play. I make a final decision on Friday. Till then, this is your old pal Justin Robert Young saying, some shows talk about politics. Others talk about politics and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss all three.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.